Welcome to live stream number 90. Today's topic is going from sculpting to the modeling workspace. It is Tuesday. It is November 14th, 2017. Thank you so much for taking the time to join today's live stream. If you're watching this, you are watching the recording. We quite haven't gotten anybody in the live stream yet, but we will just in a few seconds, hopefully. Before we get into Fusion 360 and talk about something that I think we're going to be doing a lot more here on the channel, what is working between the two different workspaces. So going from, for example, the Sculpting Workspace to the Modeling Workspace. That's what we're kind of going to talk about today. But before that, thank you so much for all the well wishes. Some of you guys don't know, some of you guys don't care. But a few days ago, last Thursday, I got a new baby daughter, baby girl. So thank you for everybody who sent me messages. Really appreciate it. And also that's why I have not been on the live stream for a few days. I should actually have been in Vegas this week because Autodesk University is going on there. But because of all this baby thing, next year. So this week, the live streams will be at 3 o'clock, just an hour later, just because there's still some stuff going on at AU that I gotta kind of like pay attention to. So with that, thank you so much, guys, for the well wishes. Really appreciate it. What we're gonna do today is we're gonna kind of like, I'm gonna jump into Fusion because people who's watching the recording maybe don't care too much. So we're going to build on what we did last Wednesday. We were talking about building a hammer, modeling a hammer inside of Fusion 360. And I put a link down in the description area, so if you're watching the recording, from last week's live stream. But because there's two things I gotta say before I jump in and start modeling. Two things we did in last week's live stream for this hammer. We showed how to go from a modeling space. So this is a lofted kind of handle to go into the sculpting workspace from modeling. And then we jumped into the sculpting workspace and we modeled up this handle for the hammer. I could probably spend a little bit more time refining it. But of course, always remember, you can always just right click down here. And then you can go in and you can edit. Well, right now we are actually in the sculpting workspace. So right now we'll literally just be selecting something, right click, hit edit form, and we could manipulate this, make it a little bit closer to this canvas I brought in for this. Now when I hit finish form, it turns into, now we're back in the modeling workspace that you probably are familiar with. And it turns it into a body in here. Now, the reason, you could have modeled everything in the sculpting workspace in here. And we kind of like did somewhat that in last week's live stream. Definitely check that out. But many times I think that it makes sense to combine the two, the modeling and the sculpting. Because sculpting really gives you kind of like that free form environment, right? Pulling, dragging, where the modeling, we can kind of like control things a little bit more maybe, and we can kind of like start driving it with maybe parameters and things like that. So the idea is here that we modeled up the handle using sculpting, getting that all kind of pretty. And then we now want to kind of like do something modeling. So the head up here is maybe what we will do standard 3D modeling with. So I'm just going to go, we jumped out of the sculpting workspace. You will see we had the original sketch, the canvas that I stole from the internet, a picture of this east wing hammer. We went into the sculpting environment. We can always go back into that sculpting environment and manipulate that. And now I'm just going to start a sketch on a plane here to do some standard modeling like we many times are doing. So I'm going to do this head here, and I want to show you a couple of things that I think is kind of important to just think about when you're working in this environment. I'm going to start out by kind of modeling up the head, and then the idea is that at some point we will blend the handle and the upper head together between the sculpting and the modeling. Now, just to make this a little bit easier on myself, I'm gonna go in and draw some lines here. I'm just not gonna be 100%, as you know me, but I'm gonna kind of like take this intersection point up here. I'm gonna kind of like create a line down to about this area and kind of going across here and kind of create like that bracket, L bracket kind of shape. Now, to create some of the other things here, we might want to jump in and start working with splines, as I've talked about before. So if we hit the sketch tool, we can hit the spline tool, and we might just, and by the way, I say this every time I work with splines. Many people think that when they got to create splines, you click once and then you kind of like, the smaller you make the points here, the better, the more control points. But as you can see, this is not really pretty. Honestly, don't do that. I'm just doing Control Z to go backwards. Here's a better thing. Click once on this corner and then go all the way down to where you think that you about want the spline to end. So I'm going to click down here, hit the green check mark. Because what you get is you're getting these handles that now will let us, in each end, that will now let us manipulate that spline. So if you're creating all those small points, it makes it just a pain in the neck to work with splines. The other trick that I normally like to use with splines is I actually like to use relationships with these spline handles. That's another thing that I think personally I failed at in the beginning when I used splines. If I go in here and create a horizontal relationship between this handle here and a vertical relationship between this handle here, what that means is you could say I've lost some of the control or the freedom over the spline, but now I literally, by just pulling, in this case horizontally and pulling vertically here, I can really get that spline actually pretty close to maybe what we want. Now I'm not going to say that you always want to do that. That's not what I'm saying, but it definitely makes it easier to kind of like start out doing it that way. Also, this image is not great. What's happening down at the end down here? I'm going to create a line, so I'm going to hit L for line, and I'm just going to create a line at a little bit of an angle. That's what I want the tip to look like. And then I might add another spline to go up to here, but when I look in here, this really looks more like a radius. So to create a radius here, maybe I go in and use the arc tool and the 3-point arc. I love the 3-point arc. That's probably the arc I'm using the most. The thing to know about the 3-point arc is that you got to just remember what order to select the 3 points in. So it's first the 2 endpoints, and then it is kind of like the center point. So I'm just going to click on and select 1 point, and where I want it to end was going to be about here, I think. And then that 3rd point that kind of controls where I want to place that. So I'm just going to select it just about there. Then I might go back again and create a spline to go from this point to that end point down there. Oh, I didn't do it. I did a 3-point arc. I wanted a spline from there to there, and again I kind of get these handles up here. Now before I did the horizontal, you can actually also create tangent relationship, what I always talk about between arcs. So you can actually do tangency between these. Now see what happened here? You see how everything kind of jumped? If this ever happens, this happens to the best of us. And I'm kind of happy that it actually happened here. Now, many times you panic and you can actually get out of here and you can kind of like try to kind of like move some things around and see if you could maybe figure out how to get out of this. And then suddenly you get this and then you start crying. When you get that happening, let me just Control Z to go back to where I was. It's normally a pretty good indication of maybe, just maybe, it's time to add some dimensions to your part and kind of like lock down all the lines that are moving around. Because you can see here, I didn't add any dimensions or constraint to kind of lock things down. So I'm going to do that now because this just happened. So this is kind of like a real kind of scenario. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to place some dimensions. Now, I maybe made a little bit of a, I don't know what to call a mistake, but one of the things that happened was when I created this whole, when we started this last Wednesday, I just kind of like scaled everything up and got modeling. And then suddenly I realized that my origin is sitting down here and has no complete relationship to anything that I really did. I would probably right now, without thinking too much about it, just go ahead and place a dimension from this corner right here to the origin and make a horizontal length here. And many times you will see I will round things up because we're just kind of like following a canvas drawing, right? So you can maybe be a little bit flexible. But I would place this dimension right here to kind of lock it into the origin, even though that this dimension right now maybe doesn't really mean anything, but just, that's where I would start. Now, having locked this in, you can see how these became black. I might also want to just maybe put a dimension on this one. So let's make it 28 maybe. And what else? We might also want, this one might also have some kind of a dimension to it, 30. Now we could try with this now locked in with dimensions. What if we repeat what I tried to do before and add a tangency and see what happens now? See, it jumps differently, right? It's still not, I'm still not happy with this. This is not okay. But it jumps differently. My point is that these dimensions now start holding onto to this. So what if we did this, for example? What if we probably have to put some kind of a radius on this this arc here? So we could add a radius to that. So that's going to be 10. And then I might also want to do a center point from the center to that edge. Okay, and let's just not round that up. And when you see this here, you will see that it turns black. This one is actually fully defined right now. I want to show you because you might say, well, I also want a horizontal dimension here. If I place this horizontal dimension, you get this pop-up. And this pop-up says adding this dimension will over-constrain the sketch. Choose OK to create a drive dimension. Now, this is important. I know that this kind of like doesn't have too much to do with bringing a sculptor to a model environment, but now where I'm at it, I might as well just jump in there. This is an extremely important, when you see this box, I think most people's natural behavior is to like, ooh, cancel, go away from it. But that's not really what it's saying. What it's saying is that whatever dimension we're adding right now would over-constrain the sketch. But it will just be what is called a driven dimension, what is more like a reference dimension. You will actually see that it turns up, you see how there's brackets around it? And it just tells you that this dimension is not needed to fully define the sketch, but you're okay placing it. Sometimes it can be nice to have these driven dimensions just as reference. I should actually maybe do a live stream on that. All right. When we got this defined now, what will happen if we add in the tangency now? Well, it still does the same thing. Okay, so I really don't want it to jump. So I'm just going to move. I really don't want it to jump. I'm just going to go ahead here and maybe just constrain some other dimensions of this spline. That is really, honestly, my best trick here is to add some dimensions to this part. Could also add something like construction lines in here. So hit X to make construction lines. So we could do some dimensions if you wanted to control that angle down here on this part. So I hope that now where I'm fighting my way through this, that at least gives you some kind of a confidence that, you know, sometimes this kind of stuff happens for all of us, and the only really way to get around it is, it's just gonna keep on doing it on me, is to be able to go back and start adding some dimensions. What happens if we put a dimension on this guy? We can actually put a dimension on that handle itself. You should think that at some point it will, then it will want to solve probably. You should think that at some point it will, well, let's try this. Let's add it. Let it jump, that's okay. I'm gonna accept that, okay? And then let's just see if we can drag it. Now I got myself into this. Anybody who follows these live streams know that this is sometimes what I'm fighting. All right, look at this. I can actually grab the end point, and I can, so I never did the length of that circle, right? So I can actually drag it back there, and now I can get the spline back to where I was. So, all right. So now I have a tangency between these two, and there's a way to solve everything here in this scenario. Okay. Now, and also with splines, like you saw before, we could add all kinds of dimensions to the handles and things like that. I don't think you have to fully define splines. I think it's okay to click on a spline, right click, and actually click this fix. That actually turns it kind of green, but it means that now it's not at least movable. All right, I'm gonna move on from this. I hope you got something out of this. Could you now delete some of these dimensions now that we got it in there? Yeah, we could. Is there any reason to? Maybe. That's kind of like depends on, you know, what if you had measured all these dimensions up on the hammer, maybe, you know, you needed them or didn't need them. All right, I'm gonna go ahead here and I'm going to extrude this. I'm just gonna use the standard extrude command, Q, and I'm gonna select this. Now, you will see here when I sketched this originally that the handle is going right through here. So if I pull this out here, it's only gonna be on one side. So we talked a little bit about this recently, about how we have all these different options even within the standard extrude buttons. So if I go in here, I could actually do something like symmetrical, and now we can kind of like control how thick we want this to be on a symmetrical place. Now I'm just gonna go in here and say we wanna make something, let's make it 12, okay? So now we kind of like maybe have something more like the hammer we want here. And at this point, you could actually also go in and add maybe something like fillets to it. Sometimes that's best to do in the end, but I'm actually going to show you a little trick with these fillets here. So I'm just going to add a couple of fillets on here. So then we kind of like got that back portion. Now, to do the head or the hitting portion of the head here, I'm going to do something. If you're new to Fusion, I'm going to do something that I did in the coffee spoon video that we just did. I could actually go in here and create an offset plane from this face. And let me go on the right side here so I can kind of like see where we're going to place it. And we could kind of like place, you know, the head out here, hit OK, and now we have that plane that is sitting here that is offset from here. Now on this plane, I could right click, hit create sketch, and now we could kind of like draw up the circle. See the circle for the hammer head here. It might be a little big, but whatever. And of course D for dimension if you wanted to add some kind of a dimension to that, so it's fully defined. And let me just extrude that out so you can kind of like see what we got here, right? So if I extrude that out here, we kind of like now have kind of the hammer head out here. But I left the transition between there. And I want to talk a little bit about the transition, because the transition here that we many times would use is what is called a loft. We've talked about the loft command before. And the reason I want to show it up here is because that's actually what I want to use between the transition down here. but there's something that is important to know about the loft. And that is that if I just leave this here, we got the head over here, we got the back end over here, I can go over here and I can create a loft. So go under create, hit loft, and I can literally just select one face and select the other face. I don't even need to go into sketches. And Fusion is smart enough to create a transition between the two. Let me turn the cameras off for a second. Between these two, and it does a really nice job with this. Now, we've talked about the loft before, so definitely make sure that you search previous live streams, or send me an email or something like that if you need more information on that. What we can do in here is we can kind of like control how the loft is going from one end to the other. But one of the things that can be very important to know, and it's not too crazy on this example, but if you notice, we have a circle here, and then we actually have a rectangle with two radiuses over on the other side. So Fusion has to kind of like make a transition between those two. And that can become, there's some math in there. And sometimes, as you will see when we go down to the sculpted face down here, it can become kind of interesting. I wanted to show you a trick that I used to use a lot, especially when you do like wire EDM, like on the shop floor. One of the tricks, let me just delete this here, the extrusion of this one. So I go back to our sketch, the circle sketch over here. One of the tricks, and you're not going to be able to see, Fusion does such a good job between this kind of rectangle with two arcs to a round, that it's probably not a big deal, but you need to know this trick. If I go in and edit this round sketch, one trick can actually be to break the circle down into the same kind of segments that the rectangle with the two arcs is. So to do that, I'm editing the sketch, the circle sketch now. I'm literally just gonna go in and hit the line command. And I would probably like be a little bit more organized than I'm gonna do here, but I'm gonna create some lines between where I think it would be logically for it to break. So this portion here will follow this portion. The arc here will go with the vertical, and then where that intersects up here, I'm just gonna create a line. And by the way, I double click, then it goes out of the line command, but goes out of the specific line, but stays within the line command. So double click, double click. I should normally I would kind of like put some angles in here, dimensions in here. But what I can do now is I can break, going into sketch, I can go in and break, use the break command. And if I hover over here, you see how we're getting two red X's where those line crosses over. So now I can actually go in here and I can break the circle into the same amount of segments that that we have in the other end over here. And when I'm done, so now this segment here represents this line, this segment here represents this line, this segment here, the arc, this is the top of the rectangle, this is the arc, and then the other side over here. Now what I'm gonna do to these line pieces is I'm just gonna hold down Control, I'm gonna select all of them like this, and then I'm gonna hit X for construction, right? Now the circle is broken into those segments, what means that when you go into a Loft command and you now are selecting this sketch, it's actually going to use that sketch broken up in segments to align, and you're going to get a little bit of a better flow between there. So just so you know you can do that. That can be an extremely great trick. Now, if I just cancel out of this and you look at the canvas in the background, So here's our circle. You will see that there is, arcs in here. And we've talked about these before. This is where we can use kind of like the guidelines in there. So now I might maybe go a little fast for some of you guys, but don't worry about it. You can skip this segment here. What I'm going to go in and do is I'm just going to go in and create a spline that kind of like follows from right there, and one that follows from right there. And then I'm just going to grab these spline, and then I'm not going to try to be perfect here. I'm just going to grab these two handles like that. It's good enough. Now I just created that sketch, so they are sitting right there. What means that when I go into the loft and I can select the circle, I select the square, then I can go down here to the rails, and I can now select these two segments. This probably has to actually touch. Yeah, it has to touch this. It's not touching the circle. They actually have to be edit sketch. They actually have to be touching the circle itself. There we go, I think we got them there. Let's go normal to this one. Got a little wacky. Something like that. Let's try that again. So loft, I'm selecting circle, I'm selecting the profile, and then I can go into the rails down here, and now we, I don't have, oh, it's not touching. Oh, I didn't move it down. Well, that's typical. So what we're gonna do is gonna edit, and let's go in and that sketch. Let's see if we can't project that down there. Okay. Delete that intersection there. Just want it to be. Okay, this maybe is something I should have prepared for. So it's like one of these ad hoc segments. I do that sometimes. Yeah, okay, I'm not gonna do that. Well, I could pull the rails down. I don't think I get it. I don't think I got it. Look at other live streams and you will see, oh, no. You will see that I did it. So I'm not gonna worry about pulling that down here. Let's just delete that sketch like that never happened. But now we can go in and do the loft from here to here. And so now we kind of like have a transition, and then we could do the head of the hammer out like whatever distance we think that should be. And let me hide that sketch. And let's put a fillet on that. All right. If you go back and look at the Loft live streams before, you will see how we talk about guide rails and all that. All right, I'm going to stop here because this was kind of a long freaking intro to start combining, sorry about that, the sculpting with the head. But I kind of like felt like talking about this lofting is important. Two things we're going to run into, there's a couple of things we're going to run into here. And I actually talked about combining things too when we did the Coffe mock. Where we went from sculpting to the modeling workspace. Now, the first thing you're going to run into, so I will use Loft again to transition from here up to here. Now, you can go in here and say, I want to open up a sketch, but then when you hover over the sculpt environment, you will see that nothing highlights. See, if I hover over the head of the hammer, it clearly sees the bottom, but it doesn't see here. And that's one of the things with sculpting is that this is not totally necessarily flat, and we need a flat surface to be able to do to sketch on, so we can combine these two. Now, when we did the Coffe mock, the handle, we did it as a surface. So I should have left a link down in the description area for that one too. I'll put that afterwards. I'll make sure that the Coffe Cup is also in there. The way we ended the sculpting at that point was it was like a surface body. The way we ended this handle was it became a solid body when we came in there. So what we're actually going to have to do is we're going to have to cut a little bit of this sculpted handle to make it flat. So think about if we had like a piece of clay and we had modeled up this handle, and now I need to kind of like get a knife and cut this a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another construction plane from the bottom of our part here, and I'm just going to kind of like eyeball it up to about where this is going to end up here. Doesn't really matter how accurate I get. Just make sure that it's high. It's not higher than the handle. And then I'm going to use the tool in the modify called Split Body. Because when we brought this in, if you look at Wednesday's, we closed this one up, so it became its own body. I'm going to hit Split Body. And over here it asks me what body you want to cut. That's going to be the handle. What is the splitting tool? Well, that's that plane I just created. And you will see it creates a little red kind of dime around it. So when I hit OK, it actually just cut that. You can see it. You see how it cut that. And if we're looking in the bodies folder, we now have 3 different bodies. We have our handle. Number 2 is that little, number 2 is probably the head. And then number 4 is that little sliver down there. And by this, I can actually answer another question I got in an email a while back. And that was when you right click on that body, that little sliver, you get 2 different options. You get delete or you get remove. And somebody asked me, what the heck is the difference? I'll show you right here. See, what happens when I hit delete is that everything gets healed up to where I deleted. Check out the screen. Hit delete, 3, 2, 1. See, it kind of like overwrote that all that work we just did. Let me do Control Z. So now we're back again. So if I right click and I hit delete, it deletes that little sliver, but it brings the rest of the handle up to where it was. It's kind of like, delete kind of like says, all right, what can I patch up and bring it back to where it should be? So that's not what we want. But if I select remove, well, then you know what's going to happen. When I hit remove, it kind of like just cuts it right there. Now we have a flat surface, and the reason you know it's a flat surface is because when I hit create new sketch and I select on that face, you can see that now it gets highlighted. Yay. Okay. So that is super cool. Now we're going to run into somewhat the same issue as we had before when we are trying to make this transition, that right now, if I say if I don't want to create a sketch here, let me stop the sketch. We're going to run into somewhat the same issue as before. Now where I cut this flat is if I go in and hit Loft and I select this face and I go up and select the hammer, we kind of get a very straightforward constraint between the two. I mean, it looks good, and actually this would kind of like finish combining these two kind of nicely. So if I just hit OK here, you will see we're now ending up with one body. So we could say this is sculpted, yay, and this is modeled, yay, and this is kind of like the transition. But it doesn't. That's not how the hammer really looks like in the canvas. In the canvas part, let me delete the Loft, it kind of like works its way in. It becomes like narrow in here and not just a directly transition. So what you maybe want to do is to kind of create that sketch and then Loft kind of like between these segments. So what I could do was I can create another offset, and I can offset from this face, create that up something. Let's do it 10 millimeters. So now we got a new plane up here. Let's go ahead and create a sketch on that. Now the hammerhead's going to be in the way. Let's just hide that for a second. So I have a new sketch here. Just to be a little crude, we could go in here and maybe just sketch. Whoops, let's hit a center rectangle. From here to here, kind of like sketch something out like this, and we could add some fillets on it. We can do that in the sketch environment too, if we wanted to, right? So we can go in here, maybe we just add some arcs on it. Like that there. And this should, of course, be fully defined, but now over my half an hour. That's sometime. Now, if we go in now, we actually have pretty close to the shape. It should be a pretty good transition between these two now. So if we're going to read a loft, select this face and select this area in here, we actually do get a pretty nice transition. Now you will see though, zoom in a little bit, can you see kind of how we do get some pull in this area here? And that is actually because that these edges don't break down the same way as these do. You see how, I hope this is easy to see. You see how this one actually has, this is half of the arc and the line, and this is kind of like, this is a continuously spline almost, where I broke this down into segments. That actually kind of gives you, you know, what I tried to show with the hammerhead before. This is maybe where you need to work some magic, kind of like creating a transition between a transition. Sometimes you actually do it by kind of breaking this down into smaller segments. So this seems like a fairly small loft, but you could, in reality, create another offset here. Let's go 5 instead of 10. So now we are halfway between these two. Open up a sketch on that. And we could do a P for project. Select these outer edges. So we're projecting those. Then we could offset them in, like maybe like this. So now we kind of took and created a next step. So now our lofts should maybe become a little bit more flexible this way, because now this is going to have a very nice transition, and then we can add another loft and kind of going up here. Now you're still going to see that arrow until you start breaking that down, but you could, you know, start modeling that up, or not modeling that up, but take this sketch here and start like I did with the upper hammerhead, cutting that segment down. So I hope that this kind of like gives you a good idea about how to kind of create these transitions, right? And just to wrap this up here, let's turn the hammerhead back on. I might just do something similar here. So how about we do a Q from here? We could, oh no, not a Q. Q would not work because then we're just dragging that edge up. See how it's kind of like doing that? What we could do was create another offset from here. Let's go that down 10, and then open a sketch, right click, create a new sketch, and then I'm going to project that up. So hit P for project, click here on the face, and now we just projected that up there. See, now that is sitting up there. And then we could use another loft, because now we have it from here to here. I'm just going to loft everything now, right? And then you could go ahead again and do maybe another loft from here to here. And again, you're going to run into the same problem. We have multiple arcs. Oh, and then let me show you another quick thing, then I'll shut up. See how there's a blue dot here? You can actually control how it tries to blend between here. This is actually can be somewhat helpful to know. I can actually drag corners. You will see how, to the right of it, to the left of it, sorry, how I'm actually, by dragging this handle, I'm actually moving that blend line. Okay, so this is definitely not perfect in here, but I mean, adding some fillets, working with some different transitions, and we kind of like ending up with, well, something a little different. So you know what? That was 40 minutes. That was a long time. But I hope that it was useful. Hey, I had to make up for the days that I missed, right? So this became a little bit longer. I hope that this was useful and didn't become too convoluted. I think that this is something that, and you let me know down in the comments area, if this is something that you would like to kind of like we continue with jumping between these two, because I think that, you know, the sculpting is really nice to make those swoopy surfaces where the model environment is a little bit better to kind of like creating, you know, more controllable shapes. All right, guys. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., same time as today. We're going to do 3 p.m. all week. That's a lot easier. Tomorrow, we're going to go to camp because that was what I had promised last week. That's would have been Fridays. That's going to be tomorrow's. We're going to talk about the heights tab. Yes, you know, it's not that difficult, but if many of you, me included when I started out, you got to spend a second trying to figure that one out. So I'm going to give you my tip to do that tomorrow. So that will be tomorrow's live stream. So if you're not into CAM, take a Wednesday off. I should also say another thing that I'm going to be testing tonight is I'm going to test a Facebook live stream that we may want to start doing on Wednesdays. So I'm going to test it out tonight to see if all my gear is all set up for Facebook. And then Wednesday tomorrow night at 8 p.m. we're going to do a little bit of fusion. It's basically very for beginner, but we're going to do a little bit, take some questions, more relaxed, no timeline, not this half an hour, maybe we run an hour, maybe we run 10 minutes if nobody shows up. That's about it. Guys, do me a favor, thumbs up if you like this, thumbs down if you don't. That is perfectly cool. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. That kind of like helps me to go to my boss and say, hey, look, I got subscribers. Hope you have an awesome Tuesday. Hope to see you tomorrow. I'm going to do what I normally do in the broadcast. And then I'm going to jump into to the live stream. So if you're watching the recording, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Also, again, thank you for all the congrats for my baby girl. I just saw in the live. This is actually my fourth with 2 stepchildren. So this is nothing new. I still look tired though. Take care, guys. Thank you so much.